Well, they are currently the big, bad, scary boogeymen of 10th edition, and Aeldari, despite some points changes and nerfs recently to things like their fate dice, are still doing very, very, very well on the tabletop. They just have some all-round, generally strong and cheap datasheets, and those are still backed up by an incredibly powerful army rule despite the nerfs, and arguably one of the best detachment rules in unparalleled foresight. So Aeldari are just reliable and unrelenting in the amount of damage that they can throw down the board, and for their points they have a good amount of durability and the ability to pretty much control the movement phase, so they are just in every single aspect of the game doing really, really well at the moment. But of course we are here to look at a top 5 list, and as before, this is 5 units that I think anyway any strong or competitive Aeldari list should at least be looking at or considering to add even more punch to their army. And like the other lists, this won't be any specific order, it is just 5 units that I think are really, really good from the Aeldari index. And first up we have an annoying little pain in the butt, which is the Autark Way Leaper. He is surprisingly cheap for what he does at 80 points, and it nets you a brilliant 14-inch move character with Lone Operative, so it really is easy to keep him outside of that 12-inch range and just basically make him untargetable. He is only toughness 3 with a 3-up save, a 4-up invuln and 4 wounds, but when you can avoid being shot most of the game if you want to, that really doesn't matter all that much. And what he does is he brings some amazing utility to your force. He not only grants your army a bonus CP in your command phase, which is already incredibly useful, but he also boosts the battle shock and leadership tests for Aeldari units within 6 inches of you by 1. So that's nothing super amazing on the face of it, but it does add a bit more protection against battle shock for you, and it means that if you do need to pass one, you can use a fate dice which is of 1 lower value to get it off, so that is a nice little bonus, a little combo that he can play with there. And then furthering his usefulness is just his sheer utility. He's got an insane range of options on the weapons front. He can take a Banshee Mask for fights first, or Mandy Blasters for devastating wounds if you do want him in melee, or you can just sit back with something like a Reaper Launcher and fire some anti-light vehicle or anti-elite shooting into the enemy, or just take a fusion gun for a bit more reliable anti-tank if you want him getting up a bit closer. It's got a strength 9 minus 4 AP d6 damage profile, so again with unparalleled foresight and potentially a fate dice, he can be doing some fairly reliable damage to things like rhinos. He is just overall so flexible, and I mean, even if you don't want him around for any damage output at all really, with that amazing movement and Lone Operative, he is perfect for just bouncing around the board, scoring secondaries for you, or holding far away lonely objectives all by himself, or just going after small throwaway enemy squads and disrupting them or killing them, all the while being almost completely safe from enemy firepower. Up next we have one of my favourite units, and one that just brings reliability in an Aeldari list to a whole another level. The Fire Prism is, despite getting a bump to 150 points recently, still an absolute steal in my opinion. It's toughness 9 with a 3-up save and 12 wounds, so it's nothing amazing from that perspective, but it's still fairly solid as a defensive profile, and it comes with either a twin shuriken catapult or shuriken cannon for some light throwaway anti-infantry firepower. But the real gun on this thing is of course the Prism cannon. And this is either a blast 2d6 strength 6 minus 1 AP 2 damage shot, or 2 strength 18 minus 4 AP flat 6 damage shots. So it's either a load more anti-infantry or some insane anti-tank. And with a 60-inch range on both profiles, this gun can pretty much touch anything on the board, and even more so, in its focused profile, it has a rule called linked fire, which means that if you have 2 fire prisms or more, one of them can fire from essentially out of line of sight. What the rule means is that you measure range and visibility to a target from another friendly fire prism. So you can easily hide one of your prisms behind terrain out of line of sight, and as long as you have another fire prism that can see the target, then both of them can shoot into it. So that's potentially 4 strength 18, 6 damage shots going into something like a tank or a knight, and it's made even better thanks to its rule Crystal Matrix, which gives a hit and a wound reroll whenever you shoot with it, which, if you remember back to the detachment rule Unparalleled Foresight, that rule also gives a hit and a wound reroll, and these two rules stack. So your 2-shot focused lance profile can now reroll both hit rolls and both wound rolls. And what that basically means is that a single fire prism can reliably one-shot a rhino tank every single shooting phase, which is really not a bad return for your 150 point investment. The Night Spinner is next on the list, another Aeldari vehicle with the same toughness 9, 12 wound, 3-up save profile. This is less of an anti-tank option, instead it just brings some incredibly solid anti-infantry firepower and just all-round annoying rules to your list. It's a bit pricier now at 170 points, so yes, it is an investment, but it is still very much worth it in my opinion. Its main gun, the Doomweaver, is Blast with devastating wounds and twin linked and of course indirect fire, which is still really useful, so it can shoot down upon the enemy safely behind terrain and out of line of sight. Yes, it does hit worse when it does that, but trust me, it's still very good. And the gun itself, the Doomweaver, is d6 plus 3 shots at strength 7, no AP and 2 damage. So I mean, it's okay. With twin linked and devastating wounds, you can still get a reasonable amount of pain onto the enemy and kill off like a couple of marines with it. But the real reason the Night Spinner is so good is its rule monofilament web. This is just fantastic, because as long as you get a hit with the Doomweaver, the enemy unit that you hit is pinned and is -2 to their movement, and they can't advance. This is just incredible. Dropping movement by 2 inches alone is really nice, making things like Marines only move 4 inches and Terminators dropping down to 3 is massive for limiting their impact on the game for a turn, but stopping advances completely is just brutal for some armies. Melee armies like World Eaters or Orcs are just gonna hate having this on a big key unit that they want to advance up. Not only does it stop potential advance and charge units, but equally it can easily mean an enemy unit can't quite reach an objective they're going after, or they can't quite get in the way to screen another valuable unit from an incoming charge, or they just can't quite get into range with any assault weapons they may have. It is such a strong ability to have, and if you manage to get first turn and you manage to slow down a unit or maybe even 2 if you have a couple of Night Spinners, that can immediately put the enemy on the back foot and give your army much better control of the battlefield, which can easily set you up in a good spot for the rest of the game. So while the Night Spinner isn't the most killy of units, for its sheer utility and its ability to debuff the enemy, the monofilament web is one of the best tools in the game to have in your box of tricks, and so for that reason alone, I think the Night Spinner is worth bringing just to slow down any big Death Star style units that your opponent may have. Moving on from tanks, we go to an Aspect Warrior unit, the incredibly mobile, frustrating and sneaky Warp Spiders. These guys are 20 points a model, so that isn't cheap for a toughness 3, 3-up save, 1 wound body, that is true. But they do have some incredibly powerful aspects of their datasheet that I think make them worth considering. They've got a 12-inch move, which is great, and of course they do have the usual Aspect Warrior 5-up invuln just to help keep them alive a little bit longer, and their gun, the Death Spinner, is an absolutely brilliant anti-infantry and in fact anti-everything gun. They can do a good amount of damage with it. It's 12-inch range, which isn't great, but they do of course have that 12-inch move, so they can actually get stuff into range quite easily, and it's d6 shots with torrent, so it's auto hitting, and then strength 4, no AP, 1 damage, which sounds pretty bad, but it has devastating wounds, so those 6s to wounds are now mortal wounds. And a squad of 10 for 200 points will get on average about 35 hits thanks to torrent, which then with the Unparalleled Foresight reroll to wound turns into just over 6 mortal wounds from those hits, in addition of course to any regular damage that you do from your normal wound rolls. So against something like Intercessors, you're looking at 2 dead Marines from failed saves and an extra 3 dead from those 6 mortal wounds, so an entire 5-man marine squad can just be wiped out in one go from these guys, and even against vehicles, those mortal wounds will add up, and you can take something like a gladiator tank down to half health in just one volley. So I think their shooting is actually quite powerful, and it's something that is quite underrated. The stacking of torrent, especially with a D6 shot gun and devastating wounds, is really quite strong. But what makes them really powerful and really worth considering in an Aeldari list, I think, is that they have a move called Flicker Jump. And what this does is that instead of moving normally, they can make a Flicker Jump move, and if they do, their movement characteristic is changed from 12 to 24. Now, they do risk taking a mortal wound after that, but it's just one, it's not per model or anything, so it's not too bad. At most, you will lose one guy. And also, this move doesn't count as an advance. It still says they can't charge after it, so you can't just move up 24 and then charge into an enemy, but you can very much make a 24-inch Flicker Jump move and then still fire your 12-inch Death Spinners into an enemy. So essentially, you can have a 36-inch threat range with your guns, and it makes them possible to absolutely go after cheap enemy chaff or flanking units, enemy units that may be in the backfield and thought they were safe holding an objective. You can just go straight after them and just absolutely shoot them off an objective. Or alternatively, you can just use that move to dart them around the board, scoring you secondary objectives, claiming objectives all game long. They can just be exactly where you need them to, and they can be such a tricky unit for your opponent to pin down and plan for. And I mean, for me, yes, at 20 points per model, they are pricey, but they are just so useful for that insane mobility they have and that ability to get right where your opponent isn't expecting them, and where they have a unit that they think is safe, you can just get right up next to them and unleash a load of mortal wounds into them. And having that mobility and maneuverability and speed just adds so much to an already fast army like the Aeldari are. Finally, we have a unit I think most people expected. It was actually a tough choice because the index does have such a good range of units. I wasn't sure whether to go for the Wraith Guard or the Wraith Knight here, but for me personally, I just love the big fella, so the Wraith Knight is taking the 5th spot in this list. He is, quite frankly, bonkers still. He's a hefty 475 points, so he's not cheap by any means, but with a toughness 12, 18 wound profile and a 2-up save backed up by the Wraithbone form reducing incoming damage by 1, he is unbelievably durable. And in my own personal experience, he's taken an entire 1500 point Ravenwing list shooting at him as he was the Oath of Moment target, and I still only managed to get him down to just over half health. So he is genuinely an incredible pain to try and get rid of, and he acts really, really well as this distraction Carnifex that just won't die if nothing else. He does, of course, though, also have a very good selection of weapons to choose from. He's got the Ghost Glaive and Scatter Shield, which brings his durability up even more thanks to that 4-up invuln, and it gives him some terrifying melee output at strength 16, minus 3 AP and flat 6 damage, or 15 anti-infantry attacks at strength 8 and 2 damage, but I think it's his ranged options where most people look to go. The dual heavy Wraith Cannon is of course the big boogeyman still. They're D3 shots each at strength 20, minus 4 AP, 2d6 damage with devastating wounds, which means of course a single fate dice wound roll of a 6 can be putting 2d6 mortal wounds into an enemy unit. And yes, we all know it's not as scary as it used to be, where you could guarantee a hit, guarantee a wound of a 6, and then guarantee the damage on the fate dice by just stacking them all in one round. You can't do that anymore, but it's still very, very powerful. It's still a fantastic combo, especially with unparalleled foresight, because you can almost guarantee a hit, you can use the 6 to guarantee the devastating wounds, and then 2d6 is still a good amount of mortal wound output to put into an enemy. It's just not as insane as it was before. I think with 2 heavy Wraith Cannons though, it's still entirely reasonable to expect to one-shot or at least pretty much destroy even something like a Land Raider or a Knight in just one shooting phase with him, so you can still absolutely put all of this damage into a key enemy unit and just completely wipe it out in a single shooting phase. I also think the Sun Cannon is good. I think it's a little bit underrated compared to the Wraith Cannon. It's 2d6 shots at strength 8, minus 3 AP and 3 damage. So yes, on the face of it, it does seem less scary than the Wraith Cannon, but again, in my own experience, I've seen the Sun Cannon wipe out an entire 5-man Custodian Guard squad in a single shooting phase thanks to that 3 damage, and anything from Terminators to Tyranid Warriors to Necron Destroyers are going to be rightly afraid of this gun, just as much as they would be from the Wraith Cannon. I've seen people do equally well with the Wraith Knight, either with dual heavy Wraith Cannons or a heavy Wraith Cannon and a Sun Cannon. I've also seen people run it with one heavy Wraith Cannon and the Scatter Shield to give it even more durability, but still a good amount of ranged output. So you really can choose whatever combo you need for a specific situation, but in any situation you choose, the Wraith Knight is going to be really, really good. And I've not seen many occasions where it wasn't able to make its points back, even at the new 475 point tag. It just combos so well with Unparalleled Foresight and the Fate Dice mechanic that you can really force through an insane amount of damage onto key enemy units and just survive almost anything that the opponent chucks back at you. It's of course made even better by the fact that it has the towering rule, which means you essentially have free reign to target anything on the board, and you should pretty much be able to shoot it without worrying about terrain or anything like that much more easily than anything else. So you can pretty much always shoot at what you want to, and the Wraith Knight will just be this immovable tower of destruction that can wipe things out every single turn. And as I said, even at the new 475 point price tag, I think it is one of the most destructive single units that we've seen in 40k for a long time now. So that is the Aeldari. Of course, as I said, there are loads and loads of units that could have been on this list. The Wraith Guard, even things like War Walkers, the weapon platforms, hell, even some Harlequin stuff like the Death Jester are all, I would argue, probably on the level of auto-include units if they were in other indexes. But these 5 that we covered here are just 5 that I would always be at least strongly considering if I was putting together a competitive Aeldari list. They're ones that I think if you do take will give you not only incredible damage output, but very strong utility, great ability to debuff the enemy, and just great ability to get across the board and get them where you need them to be with things like the Autark and the Warp Spiders. But as always, I'd really love to know what you think of this list, what you think of the Aeldari Index, and also which units you would include if you were doing a list of your own. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later guys.